Today's format will be a conversation moderated by Nader Mosazidat. Nader is the founder and partner and CEO of Macro Advisory Partners, and we're pleased to have him today serving as our moderator for the discussion. The program will conclude promptly at 12:45, and as a reminder, this discussion is on the record, and as you can notice, welcome. We're glad to have media in the room and online. Now, without further ado, let me welcome to the stage both Mark and Nader.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Bob, Nader. Hope you're sitting comfortably. I like that. Promptly at 12:45. That's guidance for me as a central banker. I won't speak as long as I did last time I was at the Economic Club of New York. But thank you, Barbara. Thank you very much for this invitation. And I'm just going to say a few words. I'm just going to begin in French because Canada is a proudly bilingual country, and we have our media here. Un petit résumé de mes paroles. Le monde a changé. En conséquence, le Canada se concentre sur ce qu'il peut contrôler. Consolider nos forces au pays et diversifier nos partenariats à l'étranger. À cette fin, nous mobilisons 1 000 milliards de dollars d'investissement au Canada au cours des 5 prochaines années dans l'énergie, les transports, les données et la défense. Les investissements qui permettront de bâtir une économie canadienne plus forte, plus concurrentielle et plus résiliente. Et pendant nous consolidons nos forces, il existe plusieurs occasions que le Canada et les États-Unis devraient saisir pour collaborer et concurrencer ensemble le reste du monde. Le moment est venu d'établir un nouveau partenariat qui redéfinira la relation économique entre nos deux pays. So if you understood that, you can talk amongst yourselves. The rest of you will listen. Look, Glenn Hutchins, I last spoke here. You introduced me, you hosted me, and at the time I was at the Bank of England, I reflected on the global financial crisis that had just passed and Brexit that was about to commence. And maybe just with referring to the global financial crisis, may I salute the many contributions that Bob Steele made as at the U.S. Treasury to helping to address. Thank you, Bob. And Bob, when I look back to those times, they were comparatively carefree days because the world is undergoing a rupture. And there's positives and challenges within this. Led by the United States, technological change is accelerating at a pace we have not seen in our lifetime. The U.S. is transforming all of its commercial relationships, as is its right. The world is becoming more divided and dangerous. And Canada recognized these developments earlier than most, and our response reflects the core lesson that we've taken from these tectonic shifts. Namely, that is that we have to take care of ourselves and we have to be true to ourselves. Taking care of ourselves means building our strength at home and diversifying our partnerships abroad. So in our first year in government, we cut taxes on incomes, on capital gains, on new business investments. We introduced something called the productivity superdeduction. What you need to know is it gives Canada the most competitive tax rate for new investment in the G7. It's half the G7 average and 4 percentage points below that of the United States. We're in the process of catalyzing $1 trillion of investment in Canada over the course of the next 5 years in energy, transportation, data, and defense. We've launched our most significant regulatory reforms in generations to fast-track hundreds of billions of dollars of nation-building infrastructure projects, and we're realizing our full potential as an energy superpower. By the end of this decade, Canada will export nearly 50 million tons of LNG annually. By the end of the next decade, we will double that capacity. We're advancing a potential pipeline that would carry at least 1 million barrels of low-emission Alberta oil per day to Asian markets, while creating an entirely new industry of large-scale carbon capture and storage. We're building, right now, the world's first operational small modular reactor in the G7, while expanding our world-leading uranium production. In the past year, we have signed 56 critical mineral agreements with more than 10 countries, unlocking more than $18 billion in capital, while reducing dependence on foreign chokeholds in that critical supply chain. We are doubling our electricity grid. That's more than 160 gigawatts of new power, building on the lowest cost power in the G7 and the second lowest emission power in the OECD. That is what an energy superpower looks like when it decides to really act as one. Now, in parallel, we're diversifying our partnerships abroad. We've signed more than 20 economic and security deals across 5 continents in the past 12 months. Our existing free trade accords already provide access to 1.5 billion consumers from the EU through to the CPTPP. We're now on track to double that addressable market this year with new deals with India, the ASEAN countries, Mercosur, Thailand, and the Philippines. We're the only non-European member of SAFE, which is the Europeans' Defense Procurement Initiative. Now, one of our core objectives of these partnerships, yes, it's access to markets, but it's also to increase our strategic autonomy. Because we all live in a world where integration has been weaponized. Think critical minerals. Because a country that can't feed, fuel, or defend itself is not truly sovereign. Because, as well, strategic autonomy today extends to building partnerships and capabilities across AI, financial payments, space, critical minerals, as I said, and clean energy. And we are making progress because Canada has much of what the world needs and wants, from energy to key aspects of aerospace, cyber, AI, and quantum. Our pension funds are amongst, and some of them are here if you need money, our pension funds, although I'm not sure the Economic Club of New York needs money or has money to, but our pension funds are amongst the most sophisticated infrastructure investors in the world, and our banks amongst the most resilient. And we are also making progress because our reputation as a reliable, predictable partner has rarely been more valuable in a world where transactions are replacing relationships. We are blessed with many commodities in Canada, but we have earned the most valuable one, which is trust. Which brings me to the second element of that lesson, which is being true to ourselves. True to our values of taking care of each other and meeting our responsibilities to our allies. Canadians take care of each other with a relentless focus on affordability, by providing universal child care, health care, education, by building, as we are now, affordable housing at scale. And we're now doing our share abroad. For the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we are meeting our NATO targets. As well, we have already embedded in our fiscal framework, in other words, we provided in our budget, a path to 4% of spending of GDP in total defense by the end of this decade, en route to the 5% NATO schedule in 2035. We've launched in recent months our first defense industrial strategy that alone will catalyze $500 billion of investment in Canada in the next decade, building on our strengths in aerospace, shipbuilding, AI, cyber, and again, quantum. We are leading NATO's multinational brigade on the front lines, and they are the front lines now, in Latvia. We are one of the largest, not the largest, per capita contributor as part of the coalition of Willing for Ukraine, standing up for freedom, for democracy, territorial integrity, human rights against criminal Russian aggression. Let me say that the outcome of this war is not in doubt. The only question is the scale of the senseless human suffering that will be inflicted before Russia and its enablers accept the inevitable. We're stepping up to protect Arctic sovereignty through intensified cooperation with the Nordic countries, with Germany, the United Kingdom, and working within NATO to make Arctic security the priority it needs to be. To back that up, we've moved quickly in the past year to build new military operating hubs, to commission over-the-horizon radar. We're going to buy new submarines, while adding to the world's largest fleet of icebreakers. We're also in the process of creating a new multilateral institution, the Defense, Security and Resilience Bank, to provide long-term, low-cost financing for defense and resilient projects across NATO allies. And being true to our values also means continuing to invest in global public goods, in climate finance and development finance, even as others are sharply pulling back. And it means helping to broker an enormous potential trade pact between the EU and the CPTPP, a bridge that would expand the footprint of rules-based trade. We're just getting started, but the early results are encouraging. Canada is projected to have the second fastest growth in the G7 this year and next. We already have the strongest fiscal position in the G7, and we're reinforcing that advantage by cutting 10% of the federal civil service, 20% of our spending on consultants, and reducing the annual growth of operational spending from over 8% per year, which is where it's been for the past 10 years, to less than 2%, which is where it's been since I came into government and where it will stay. Non-U.S. exports are up sharply, and we're on track to double them, which is our target over the next decade. And foreign investment is now running at twice the rate of our nearest G7 peer. In some measures, we are ranked as the most attractive country in the world for infrastructure investment. So let me bring this to a conclusion. That's a false, it's going to take longer than a few words, but I'm going to bring it towards a conclusion before the conversation with Nader. And I'm going to draw on an insight of the Finnish president, my friend Alex Stubb, who observed that people consistently, myself included, do three things: over-rationalize the past, over-dramatize the present, and underestimate the future. And so when I look back at the right path out of the global financial crisis and the right response to Brexit, both of those now look very clear in hindsight. But I think as Bob, myself, Tim Geithner and others can tell you, that as being at the table during the time, there were relatively few who identified those paths. And there were fewer still who had the courage of their convictions to walk them. Because in a crisis, the fog and fear are real. They always are. The right response to these tectonic forces, the global rupture that I described at the start, the right response today is clearer than it may feel. It's the same. In a crisis, fortune always favors the bold. Canada got this early. We understood the world's change. We understand that nostalgia is not a strategy, so we're focused on what we can control. And that means weaving a dense web of international partnerships abroad. That's making us a much stronger, more resilient, more independent country. Above all, as you would expect, we're focused on things that are good for Canada. This is good for all Canadians, but it's also good for the United States, because a stronger Canada is a better ally. And we know that while Canada and the United States have had our differences over the centuries, we have always worked and eventually worked through them because we share values and our common interests run deep. They run through our economies. Canada is America's largest customer. We buy more goods from America than China, Japan, and Germany combined. Those common interests run through our supply chains, where 70% of Canadian exports are inputs to American cars, homes, aircraft, machinery, finished goods, creating hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. value add. They run through our energy partnership, where, at a time of a global energy crisis, Canada provides the United States with reliable power, with critical minerals that help fuel American growth. 99% of U.S. natural gas imports, 85% of electricity imports, 60% of crude oil imports. That is mutual strength. Let's be absolutely clear. Canada Strong will help make America great again. The examples of where that's true are legion, where we should work together and compete with the world together. And to those ends, we have made specific practical proposals to the U.S. administration. Consider aluminum. It's basically electricity in an ingot. And Canadian exports to the United States are the energy equivalent of 10 Hoover dams. With America's growing energy needs because of the incredible transformation here, does it really make sense to build the gigawatts here needed to replace Canada? On automobiles, Canada is far and away America's biggest customer, and an integrated North American market for production is the best and most durable way to confront intense, truly intense global competition. On critical minerals, with our endowments from potash, nickel, copper, uranium, lithium, cobalt, beyond, Canada can be the most reliable supplier that America needs to put affordable food on the table, strengthen national defense, and meet the exploding demand to power AI. So Alex is right. We shouldn't underestimate the future. As the United States approaches its 250th birthday, happy birthday, as the most in advance, but it approaches this moment as the most dynamic, resilient, and inventive country the world has ever seen. As a country whose founding values of liberty, democracy, justice, and openness should continue to serve as guides to its future and the future of the world. That future should include a new partnership with Canada, a true partnership that reimagines cooperation in specific sectors that are deeply challenged by global competition, a partnership with a different Canada, a stronger Canada, a more confident Canada, a country that is applying the lessons from past crises, a country unleashing its enormous potential, a country aggressively translating our belief in openness into dozens of new partnerships, a country that's predictable, reliable, and principled in a world that's anything but. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
I thought we'd start with a global economy question. What you spoke about, diversification, autonomy, resilience, sovereignty, these are all, of course, not just geopolitically and macroeconomically challenging, but they're also structurally capital intensive, which the energy and AI build-out that you just spoke about is only sharpening. This global economic rewiring driving higher for longer inflation is a trend that you were tracking long before most as a central banker, and it has only intensified since. Bending the path of monetary policy and redefining the economic playing field for every major economy, not just the U.S. So my question, to start us off, is when you think about this new era of strategic autonomy, how you're driving that change for Canada, and how many other countries are also beginning to follow your lead, is this a fundamentally higher inflation, higher growth equilibrium, what you called a while ago growthflation, or do you see a path to managing this inflation picture in part by fixing some of the imbalances in the global economy that are also going to be on the agenda of the G7 meeting that's coming up in a couple of weeks?
Okay, well, brings me back to, yes, the good old days of central banking again. The short answer is yes, in terms of the overall trends. I think you've described it well, and let me expand a bit, which is that there are structural inflationary pressures that come, and I've spoken about this in the past, around the time that I gave the speech here, actually, I think, about the process of deglobalization, some forms of fragmentation. I mean, one of the benefits of globalization, there are many challenges, but one of the benefits was it was structurally disinflationary. And the reverse is also proving to be true, the fragmentation that comes with that. In many cases, for good reason. There's being more resilient. You're paying an insurance premium to become more resilient, but that has to be ultimately paid and is passed through. So there's a structural element to that in and of itself, just in terms of the changing of the level of integration. Okay, the first point. Second point, part of your question, but very much of the reality that this room, this city, this country is living, is just the scale of the infrastructure build-out that is only just beginning across, I'll call it the intelligence stack, but it's everything from power to the data centers, to the chips, to the and beyond, that comes and affects virtually every enterprise, and it's only just starting. And the scale and the speed of that build, which on one hand is tremendously exciting and promising, on another hand just causes big shortages. You think about if you're in the energy business, 5 years to get a gas turbine is one example of that. Land, power, those elements are front and center. So that is adding, I think, to inflationary pressure. The third element, which we haven't yet seen, but we're at the cusp, and again, because we're in the heart of global finance, a number of the people in the room would be living this, is actually the cost of protection, cyber protection, basically I'll call it cyber protection, but the broader range of protections that's occasioned by mythos. Everyone knows what mythos is in this room, and what that's showing, and that's, I think, is going to be the early stage of of just a big operating spend that's going to be required to address those issues. So the marginal cost of software is no longer zero. It's actually quite material and is likely to be there for some time. So those are three elements of the structural inflationary pressures that are there. Then you have what's coming with that, the growth component, certainly the growth component which comes from the investment boom, the growth component which, and this is one of the big questions, when will the productivity show up on a macro scale? It will come, but when does that show up, and which would offset some of this. Finally, you throw into that the challenge we have globally, and it will be one of the issues center stage at the G7 around global imbalances, Chinese overcapacity, Chinese underconsumption. I mean, just put in context, China's ballpark 13% of global consumption, 30% on the way to 40% of global manufacturing. Okay, so just orders of magnitude the pressures that come there. It's a bit of an offset to the inflation side, but we can't solve the macro problem ultimately. You never totally solve a macro problem without getting the imbalances component addressed there. Some of that will be financial. So, last thing I'll say and then hand back to you, which is part of the answer, not all of the answer, but part of the answer is going to be around energy. And when you look from our perspective, we see a very clear path to doubling what is the lowest cost energy effectively in the OECD of the major economies, doubling that grid, doubling it without emissions materially. We see a very clear path to expanding our energy exports, which are the cheapest natural gas effectively in the world, certainly landed in the United States, and the cheapest oil exports that the U.S. can get, plus on the critical mineral side. So part of a structural solution, Canada, we have it, we're going to benefit from it, but it is part of a potential structural solution in a new partnership with the U.S.
Great. Let me just pick up on one element of this before we take a broader set of issues that you're leading, not just for Canada, but for much of the rest of the world. So another way to think about this junction of the global economy, you and I have been talking about this, is that whether in the context of the global economy or in geopolitics, this is becoming, I think, more and more clearly an age of asymmetry. It's a transitional era where power flows less from size or wealth than from the ability to convert imbalances into leverages. As great powers seek to exercise their power in the ways that they do, a range of countries like Canada, middle powers, and others are seeking to identify their asymmetric strength, their source of leverage. We think of asymmetry a lot as a risk or a challenge, but if you look at various choke points and whether upstream inputs to the global economy, how do you think about that as you're now putting into place and really executing on the vision in Davos? How are you thinking about how Canada can win in this age of asymmetry?
Yeah, this is a crucial point, and it's a very good, it's your framing actually, the age of asymmetry, but it's a very good way to understand how many countries around the world are approaching their trade relationships, their investment relationships, their priorities. For exactly the reason, you can look at it defensively. Where am I exposed? We used asymmetry, to use your framework, against Russia with the financial payment system. China used it on critical minerals. Those are two prominent examples. But where else am I exposed? Am I exposed in space? Am I exposed in cyber? Am I exposed in various? And that is the framing. At a minimum, as a leader, you have to think about those issues and how do I minimize those exposures. The answer, if you're a country of the size of Canada, or even if you're, a European, one of the major European economies, is there's no one answer. The answer is a series of partnerships, a web of partnerships that need to be put in place. Then the more positive side, so that's a defensive thing. Who do I need? Who can I rely on, and who's not going to hold me up down the road? That dictates a lot of these trade discussions. The more positive is, well, where can I be a solution to others? And that's where I do think we have a number of advantages in Canada. Let me give it specific. Let me granular. So I mentioned critical minerals. Okay, so what? Well, here's the so what. Last week I was in Quebec. We opened broke ground on the largest graphite mine in the G7, 8 times the production of everywhere else. Key for, and it's integrated into battery chains and others is what will be built. So who are the offtakes? The Government of Canada provided support to get the thing going. Here's your guaranteed off. We've already syndicated it out to Italy, to Japan, Panasonic in the case of Japan, E&I for Italy, and Luxembourg that is buying off of that, so that they know that they don't have that chokehold on lithium. That's one example. We announced yesterday, again, private company, indigenous-led actually, private company, an LNG, 25-year LNG train to Germany, which helps obviously reduce exposure to Russia. So, that's sort of energy providing. Same thing on uranium. Where else are we strategically relevant? I think, well, I know we are strategically relevant in cyber.